Once again, folks, it's fall, and that means it's not just football, it's Republicans versus Democrats and a dysfunctional Congress. They're taking their stand against Obamacare, and they want to prevent it from going into effect by taking away its funding. But will that work?
Well, the Republicans say they don't want to shut down the government in the battle over Obamacare. So as Ephraim Graham reports, Washington could be headed for another political showdown.
October 1st marks the start of the new fiscal year, and lawmakers must pass a bill to avoid a default on federal debts. A House vote is expected Friday on a Republican plan, and Speaker John Boehner says the legislation would keep the government running through December 15th. But it's not sitting well with the White House. Tied to the bill is a measure that would defund President Obama's health care law.
I think this is the time for us to say once and for all, we can't afford these kinds of plays. I know the American people are tired of it. I'm tired of it, and I suspect you're tired of it too.
But Republicans are calling this bill a line in the sand, and they say they will not vote for legislation to keep the government running unless killing the health care law is tied to it.
Republicans who are in the House of Representatives right now, they all ran on either defunding or repealing Obamacare.
Polls show more Americans oppose the Affordable Health Care Act than support it. According to an NBC Wall Street Journal poll, 45% of Americans think Obamacare will hurt the health care system. 31% don't think it will do any harm. On Wednesday, House Republicans proposed their first comprehensive alternative to the health care law. It would give tax incentives to consumers who buy their own insurance and would increase government funding for high-risk insurance pools. Democrats denounced the GOP plans. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar said, quote, "A group of extremists is threatening to hold our government hostage." But Boehner says the goal is not a government shutdown. It's to end a health care law that the American people don't want. After a House vote, the bill will head to the democratically controlled Senate. Boehner said, quote, "The fight over here has been won. The House has voted 40 times to defund, change Obamacare, to repeal it. It's time for the Senate to have this fight." Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Thanks, Ephraim. There's no question that the country is turning toward the Republicans on this issue. I mean, more and more the labor unions and others are beginning to feel the bite of this thing, and people's health care is going to go up dramatically. They're going to lose their opportunity to have their own personal physicians, and it just turns out that the president gave us a bunch of lies. He doesn't tell the truth, and he's not owning up to what he said before, but I'm sure the Republicans are going to play that. The trouble is this shutting the government down doesn't work, because there are many services that people get from their government. They want the mail to operate, and so they get their letters. They want their checks, their Social Security checks, their veterans benefits. They want all these things happening. They want the courts open. They want all these things working. And certainly in the military wants to get its pay. And so you shut the government down, and suddenly the people who don't like that are going to use everything they can to make it look horrible. And they'll all blame it on the Republicans. It's not a smart move. And Karl Rove had an op-ed today that I thought was very perceptive, and he just said this is a losing strategy. You're going to do this in the House, then it'll go to the Senate will vote against it, and then it'll come back, you do it again, and then you refuse to fund the government, and then all of a sudden the president is on television saying, aren't you a bunch of obstructionists? And some of these people are saying, well, the Republican Party is in the hands of these extremists, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't play well. So they've got to find another way of getting the job done, but this debt ceiling fight isn't where it should be taken hold. It won't work. Well, President Obama says the government debt isn't going up. How about that? John Jessup has that amazing story.
Pat, the president says raising the government's debt ceiling doesn't mean the country is going further into debt. Speaking to the Business Roundtable, the president said raising the debt ceiling, which has been done over 100 times, does not increase our debt. It does not somehow promote profligacy. All it does is it says you got to pay the bills that you already racked up, Congress. But critics argue that repeatedly raising the debt ceiling has opened the door to more government spending, and that has led to a rising national debt. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul and other senators are pushing for a sweeping overhaul of the federal guidelines for prison sentences. They say the guidelines disproportionately hurt minorities and that each case should be judged on its own merits rather than have harsh sentences imposed because of the current guidelines. Today, there are more than 218,000 federal prisoners, but in the 1980s, there were only about 25,000. The growth came after the mandatory penalties were put in place. Both the Senate and the House are considering measures to reform the guidelines. And Pat, I know that you feel pretty passionately about this. A lot of these sentences lead to what many call a miscarriage of justice.
There's no question about it. This thing is an outrage. The United States has more people incarcerated than any other nation on earth, much higher than Red China, much higher than the Soviet Union. I mean, it's just outrageous what we've done, and it's just crazy. People have an ounce of marijuana, so they get 5 years in jail. It's just insane. It's just absolutely insane. And when they've had these mandatory minimums, judges can listen to a case, but they have to assign a penalty. If somebody says, well, they're guilty, then they've got to go for 10 years or 20 years or whatever. And to think that our prison population since that time has gone up tenfold, we can't afford it. It's demoralizing, and it's to do this to people. And something's got to be done, and it's done on the state level as well as the national level. But we've done a series called Nation of Criminals. And what is being said, Rand Paul says it right, it falls disproportionately on minorities, and the people who get socked away are the inner city black people who can't afford expensive lawyers. And just routine, they run through the system. They don't quite know what they're doing. The next thing you know, they're in jail for 5 years, and then they become hardened criminals, and then they come out, and the only career open to them is to deal drugs or to steal. I mean, it's just totally counterproductive, and something's got to be done. And we've got to wake up as a nation and stop this knee-jerk reaction as I'm tough on crime. Well, by all means, be tough on crime, but this isn't the way to show your toughness. John.
Next year's Senate campaign is already underway in West Virginia, and a leading Democratic candidate is criticizing President Obama's policy on coal at a time when the industry finds itself in a fight for survival. As Caitlin Burke reports, the outlook looks grim as the U.S. reduces its coal dependence to the lowest level in decades.
From Appalachia to Wyoming, thousands of coal miners are joining the ranks of the unemployed. According to government estimates, the U.S. is set to close a record number of coal-fired power plants over the next 3 years, choosing instead to go with more renewable energy sources. Coal's share of U.S. electricity generation sank to a record low of 37% last year. That's down from 50% in 2005, and the future looks even bleaker. But in places like Mingo County, West Virginia, coal still pays the bills. West Virginia is the country's second largest coal producer, but as the demand continues to decline, thousands of miners and workers connected to the coal industry are losing their jobs.
You go to your kids' baseball games and people can't enjoy their family time, the time with their kids, because the talk of the whole town is actually about a layoff or about a job shutting down.
William Rainey, president of the West Virginia Coal Association, says clean coal technology isn't being given a chance.
It's got a long history, and people rely on that history to refer to it as a dirty fossil fuel. And you do. You get your hands black when you touch it, and it's dusty. But we've learned how to control the dust, and you know, we're getting better every day.
Even so, President Obama put fighting climate change on his priority list. And according to the White House, that means coal has to go. It also means more than 5,000 coal jobs could be going with it over the next 2 years. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
It was up and away for stocks and gold after Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke said the Fed would not cut back on its stimulus program for the economy. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 closed at record highs after Bernanke's announcement, and gold shot up $60. The Fed says the economy is growing moderately, but it still needs more support. And Pat, two questions for you. How much longer do you think the Fed can sustain this policy? And what does the shocking move really say about the strength of the economy right now?
Well, John, what it says is that they're destroying our dollar, and the smart money is going to be jumping away from the United States dollar because the Fed is accommodating the profligate ways of Congress. That's what it amounts to. Congress is sending them a blank check, and the Fed is saying, okay, we'll pay the bill. We'll pay the bill. $85 billion a month is just outrageous. And people who depend on a fixed income are getting hammered. The retirees are just getting crushed to pieces by this thing. All right, so Janet Yellen's going in, is head of the Fed. She's for loose money. And already the price of gold has jumped, the price of silver has jumped, the price of platinum has jumped. All these things are going up, and they're going to go up more and more because people are going to seek refuge from the dollar.
So what do you suggest?
For you, for me, or for the audience, or for the country?
All. All of the above.
Well, I tell you what, I have the privilege of managing some money for CBN, and we have a fund we call the Treasury account, and I've had it in Australian dollars and made some money and, you know, various other things. But for the last couple of years, it's just been sitting in dollars, and they don't earn any interest, nothing. It just sits there. And so when we need to fund a Superbook or something like that, we've got some money, so we use it. Okay. Recently, I told them, I said, I want to take one quarter. Gold, GLD, the gold ETF, SLV, silver ETF, Chemico, which is a proxy for uranium, and also it's called spot physical platinum. And I put all this money into these things because I think the United States dollar is going to get trashed. We are trashing it, and that's what Bernanke's policy is doing. It's not going to sustain the dollar, and the Chinese are going to begin to have other sources of renminbi. The yuan is going to become a currency. The Gulf states are going to put together a gold-backed dinar or something like that. And the question is, how soon will it be before we lose reserve currency status? That's the important thing. We could now print money without any consequence because ours is a reserve currency, and everybody has to translate their money into dollars in order to buy. Once we lose that reserve currency status, which is going to come about with this profligate activity. So I think we're on the road to fiscal collapse if we keep this up, and I don't see any way in Washington where they're going to get together and put the needs of the country first. Everybody, we've got the most partisan president we've had in the history of this nation, at least certainly in recent history, and I'm going to get you whether you like it or not. And so now the Tea Party's knocking heads because they're elected to do something. So it's going to be tough. It really is. So that's what I did with reserve. Now, in terms of other things, certain stocks have gone up. Dow Chemical went up because they can get cheap gas. So you know, the feedstock for chemicals is cheap, and therefore they're making money. So you know, the British telecommunications company that sold a big piece of their telephone, you know, mobile telephone, they got $130 billion, and so they've got a lot of cash, and it's a nice company. So there's some good companies out there that have gone up quite substantially, but I think the stock market is going to be crashed. Once we crash the dollar, it'll crash the stock market too.
That's not good news.
Well, I mean, it is if you got the right investments. It's going to be good for those who are playing the inflation game. But we haven't had inflation, but this has got to bring on inflation. It can't help it. So that's, you know, but don't necessarily do what I say. You just do what you feel like doing.
Do as I say, not as I do.
I just showed you what I did, and we'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, then I'll come back a few weeks or months and say, well, I made a mistake.
Well,
we all make mistakes.
you have wise counsel.
All right.
A Tennessee judge has ruled in favor of parents who want to name their 8-month-old baby Messiah. At a paternity hearing last month, the unmarried parents asked the court to rule on the baby's last name. The child support magistrate ruled on the baby's last name, but also ordered his first name be changed as well. She said Messiah was a title reserved for Jesus Christ. On Wednesday, a judge ruled the lower court acted unconstitutionally. Well, the military in Egypt is cracking down on Islamists in that country. Egyptian forces backed by helicopters have surrounded an Islamist stronghold outside of Cairo. Armed jihadis there had killed a senior police officer. They also took over town buildings, including schools and mosques. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.